Paul Atreides has already endured more than almost any character in the Dune saga. He lost his father, watched his family fall, survived the harsh world of Arrakis, and eventually became Emperor of the known universe. Yet when we see Paul in the story that follows, he appears to be a completely different man, older, exhausted, and seemingly scarred by something horrific. His damaged appearance immediately raises an important question: what really happened to Paul Atreides? His condition is not simply the result of aging or the battles he fought as Muad'Dib. Something much more devastating happens to him after he becomes Emperor, and it changes both his body and his relationship with the future. After Paul's victory over House Harkonnen and Emperor Shaddam IV, he appears to have everything he once wanted. He has defeated his enemies, married Princess Irulan, become Emperor, and secured the future of House Atreides. But his victory comes with an enormous price. The Fremen Jihad has spread throughout the galaxy, and billions have died in Paul's name. Instead of enjoying his power, Paul becomes increasingly haunted by what his rise has unleashed. He can see possible futures through his prescient abilities, but that gift has become more of a burden than an advantage. He knows that powerful enemies are working against him, and eventually their conspiracy leads to an attack that will permanently change his life. At the centre of that attack is the Stone Burner, one of the most terrifying weapons in the Dune universe. It is an atomic device capable of unleashing a devastating explosion along with extremely dangerous radiation. Anyone caught within its range can suffer catastrophic injuries, and for Paul, the consequences will be especially severe. Paul eventually becomes the target of such an attack. The conspirators behind the assassination attempt are determined to remove him from power rather than simply attacking him with soldiers or assassins. They use the Stone Burner to create destruction on a much greater scale. When the weapon is activated, Paul is caught within its effects. He survives, but at a terrible cost. The intense radiation from the Stone Burner destroys Paul's eyes, leaving him physically blind. This is one of the most important developments in Dune Messiah, because Paul loses his ordinary ability to see at exactly the moment when his relationship with Prescience becomes even more complicated. However, Paul's blindness is not as straightforward as it would be for an ordinary person. Paul can still see. His physical eyes have been destroyed, but his prescient abilities allow him to perceive the future. Because Paul has already experienced possible events through his visions, he can continue navigating the world despite his blindness. He essentially relies on what his mind can perceive rather than what his damaged eyes can physically see. This makes Paul's condition especially tragic. The man who can supposedly see the future has lost the ability to see the present with his own eyes, and this is where the damaged appearance associated with Paul in Dune 3 becomes significant. But the physical damage is only part of the story. Paul's real transformation is psychological. By this point, he has become increasingly uncomfortable with the empire and religion that have grown around him. The Fremen once saw him as the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. Now his name has become a symbol used to justify a galaxy-wide holy war. Paul never completely controls what happens after his rise to power. His visions show him terrible possibilities, but every attempt to avoid one future can lead toward another. He becomes trapped between his desire to prevent catastrophe and his knowledge that many paths eventually lead to violence. The Stone Burner attack therefore becomes another reminder that Paul cannot escape the consequences of his position. His blindness also connects directly to Fremen culture. Among the Fremen, a person who becomes permanently blind is traditionally expected to walk into the desert rather than remain a burden on the tribe. Arrakis is an unforgiving world, and someone who cannot see is considered incapable of surviving independently. Paul eventually chooses to follow this tradition, but his decision is not simply about blindness. By this stage, Paul is emotionally exhausted. He has lost people he loves, witnessed unimaginable destruction, and become responsible for a movement that has killed billions. His visions have also shown him futures that he desperately wants to avoid. The weight of everything he has done and everything he believes he is destined to do becomes too much. When Paul eventually walks into the desert, it represents his rejection of the life he once fought so hard to create. He is no longer interested in ruling an empire or being worshipped as a messiah. Instead, he chooses to disappear. This is one of the most important differences between the young Paul and the Paul we encounter later in the story. In Dune, Paul is desperately trying to survive and protect his family. He eventually embraces his position among the Fremen and uses his abilities to defeat his enemies. But in Dune Messiah, he begins questioning whether winning was ever truly a victory. His damaged appearance therefore carries symbolic meaning. Paul is not simply an injured emperor, he is a man who has been physically and emotionally broken by the consequences of his own rise. His ruined eyes are particularly symbolic because vision has always been central to Paul's character. His greatest ability is his power to see possible futures, yet after the Stoneburner attack, his physical sight is gone. He can still perceive what lies ahead, but he can no longer look at the world in the ordinary way. Eventually, Paul returns to the story in a very different form. In Children of Dune, he appears as a mysterious preacher known as the Preacher. He no longer wants to rule the Empire and has withdrawn from his former position of power. By then, Paul has essentially turned his back on the role of Muad'Dib. He still possesses extraordinary abilities, but he chooses not to use them in the same way. His withdrawal is connected to his guilt, his grief, his exhaustion, and his realization that he has already set events into motion that he can no longer completely control.